Hello Clanker Inventors, Aino is a new support unit who aims to enable future Nod-Krai units. She also excels as a general Hydro support and Elemental Mastery buffer, making her flexible enough to slot into most teams. For builds, go with Silicon Moon's Serenade in order to boost her supportive capabilities. Use Elemental Mastery, and Crit main stats, and prioritize Energy Recharge, Elemental Mastery, and Crit for her substats. The recently released Flame Forged Insight is her best claymore, but the craftable Master Key is a close second if you missed out on the event option. Hi, I'm Aaron, and this is your Too Long Didn't Watch. If this is all the information you wanted, then I want to thank you for stopping by. But for everyone still here, let's dive right into Aino's overview. Aino is the 4-star support that is supposed to enable functionality in the new Nod-Krai units. Aino's skill is the same sort of dash like Chiori, Lanyan, Kuching, and Alhaitham have, but with a minor twist. You can tap it for Aino to throw out a projectile that she will then dash to in a specified direction or at the closest enemy. It can also be held to aim the projectile that Aino will then dash to. The projectile and this dash will deal hydro damage to the enemy it hits, with the dash impact having a larger AoE. Her elemental burst is much like Ayato's or Ganyu's. Aino summons an area where she will deal hydro damage to a random enemy once per 1.5 seconds with normal ICD. Unlike other Nod-Krai units, Aino does not have her own reaction she brings to the table. Instead, she only has the normal ascension passives that all other units have, though she does also increase the party's moon sign by 1. Her first ascension passive grants her a self buff when the party's moon sign is in Ascendant Gleam. If this is the case, her burst will now fire a water ball once every 0.7 seconds while applying hydro once per 2.1 seconds, and these attacks will also have a larger AoE. And for her Ascension 4 passive, Aino's burst will deal increased damage based on 50% of her elemental mastery. Aino follows the usual burst support talent priority, but with a small caveat. Since her reaction damage makes up to 97% of her total output, her talents barely impact team DPS. Instead, getting her to level 90 is your top priority. If you are still looking to upgrade her talents, start with her burst, since that's where 60 to 85% of her personal damage comes from. But don't overinvest. That's her only worthwhile talent, so you can then skip her skill and normal attacks, as both contribute to a less than noticeable damage increase. Aino's combos are very easy to get used to. Simply use your skill, then burst, like most other off-field support units. It's just that simple. Now that we've gone through her base kit, let's go through her constellations and see what they bring to the table. Aino's C1 boosts her and the current active party member with a non-stackable 80 elemental mastery for 15 seconds after using her burst or skill. It's a nice bonus, but the impact is minor since only 2 units benefit and the EM boost is rather small. Still, if your main DPS deals most of the team's damage and scales well with elemental mastery, it can offer a fine damage boost. Aino's C2 adds a new effect when she's off-field during her burst. If your active character hits a nearby enemy, her burst fires an extra water ball once per 5 seconds, dealing AoE hydro elemental burst damage based on 25% of her attack and 100% of her elemental mastery. It's a solid upgrade, boosting Aino's damage and adding extra hydro application, which helps teams where she struggled to maintain her hydro aura, but in her best teams, this will have little to no impact. C3 boosts her burst level by 3, giving Aino a decent personal damage bump, but since her own damage is pretty garbage, this ends up being her second worst constellation. C4 restores 10 energy to Aino when her skill hits an enemy once per 10 seconds. This drastically reduces her energy requirements and lets her invest into elemental mastery or crit for stronger reaction damage. It's a solid boost to both damage and flexibility, making her easier to use and viable in more situations. C5 raises her skill level by 3, but since her personal damage is negligible, this boost is basically worthless, easily her worst constellation. C6 boosts Electro-Charged, Bloom, Lunar-Charged, and Lunar Bloom reaction damage by 15% for 15 seconds after Aino uses her burst. If the moon sign is Ascendant Gleam, the bonus jumps to 35%. This constellation has the potential to be incredibly powerful. However, outside of her best team with Flynn's and with Hyperbloom comps, it's mostly irrelevant, but in those teams, it does lead to a huge damage spike. Overall, Aino's constellations are rather underwhelming. C3 and C5 are nearly worthless, while C1 and C2 offer only minor gains. The only standouts are C4, which allows her to build into more offensive stats, and C6, which massively boosts damage in Taser and Bloom teams, but does nothing elsewhere. That being said, this isn't all bad, as this just means you don't need to chase high constellations to get value from her. But with her constellations over with, let's move on to her best artifact options. Aino shines by enabling other Nod-Krai units. As such, her best artifact set by far is Silicon Moon's Serenade. This set scales with the party's moon sign and synergizes with the other Nod-Krai set, boosting her buffing power to other Nod-Krai units even more, while also giving her 20% energy recharge, making her energy needs much easier to manage. damage. It's her best in slot in every scenario. If for some reason you're not using it, Noblesse Oblige is a decent set to fall back on, but only if another unit benefits more from her signature set, which currently isn't the case. So yeah, Silken Moon's Serenade all the way. For main stats, Aino prefers Elemental Mastery, and Crit, as it gives the best boost to her personal performance. If you're running her with Nilo, you can swap the Crit Circlet for Elemental Mastery, but otherwise stick with the Crit Circlet for optimal results. For substats, energy recharge is key. Without C4, Aino's low energy generation means she needs about 210% energy recharge despite her low burst cost. With C4 reducing her burst cost by 20%, that drops to 160% energy recharge, so aim for the threshold based on her constellation. Next, stack Elemental Mastery, targeting at least 800 EM when out of combat. Finally, focus on crit stats with a 1-to-2 crit rate to crit damage ratio, but this should be your last priority. With artifacts done with, next up are her weapon options. Aino's best in slot claymore is the event weapon Flame Forged Insight. It offers the highest Elemental Mastery and cuts her burst cost by 24, dropping it from 50 to 26 pre-C4 and from 40 to just 16 with C4. This weapon practically eliminates all her energy needs while also boosting her Elemental Mastery stat by a significant amount. That being said, with this weapon and before C4, she can still struggle with energy in teams that generate less of it. In this case, Master Key takes the crown with its huge energy recharge and slightly worse Elemental Mastery stat. Sometimes boosting overall energy gen beats just cutting burst cost, especially in teams with low energy generation. This makes Master Key a solid choice before C4 when energy is tight. Plus, it's her best weapon option that's not locked behind an event. Redhorn Stone Thresher is her next best option thanks to its massive crit damage. It boosts Aino's potential DPS the most in teams where crit stats enhance her reaction damage, but overall, it only gives about a 1% personal DPS increase, making it hard to justify for a 5-star weapon. Not recommended. Finally, there's Favonius Greatsword. Like Master Key, it shines pre-C4 by boosting energy recharge, but offers no offensive stats for Aino herself. It's best when paired with a teammate who needs heavy energy recharge, letting them build more into damage. Since this damage boost to the main DPS outweighs Aino's damage drop, it will normally end up increasing the team's overall damage. Outside of this though, it's not worth using. Normally I'd talk about synergies here, but Aino doesn't have any clear ones right now. The closest is Flint's. She boosts his damage, applies hydro, and fits his fast rotations, but he doesn't really support her back. So yeah, no real synergy. Instead, let's move on to Aino's team compositions. Aino's prime spot is in lunar charged teams with Flynn's and Anefa, where she massively buffs Flynn's and enables both to shine. Her short cooldowns also sync perfectly with their quick rotations, making her practically mandatory. With her unique buffs, hydro application, and low cooldowns, she is the undisputed best hydro support for this team. Aino also fits well in bloom teams, especially quick bloom. Her hydro application enables blooms for Lauma or Nahida to buff, while Electra units dish out heavy aggravate damage. What sets her apart though is her unique reaction buff when at C6 and her low energy cost, making her easier to use than other hydro enablers like Candace, Yelan, or Xingqiu, even if they do offer more raw damage. Aino can also fill in on Bountiful Core teams if you lack Kokomi, but her slower hydro application means she's not ideal for Nilo teams without Lauma, who she would then nerf, so she's an option but a pretty dysfunctional one. Aino can also work as a support for vaporized teams, especially with her second constellation. Her main challenge is she needs another Nod-Krai unit, usually Anefa, to keep up with faster pyro applicators. Without Anefa or her C2, she can struggle to apply enough hydro to fully support some pyro DPS units. Finally, there are free-to-play freeze teams, which get a large benefit from Aino's hydro application when the main DPS is not a normal attacker. It took a long time for Ayaka to finally receive a free-to-play buff, but hey, better late than never. But for now, let's end off this guide video with Aino's rating. Aino's damage is pretty weak, even for a support. Some defensive support units who barely deal damage can still outdamage her, which is honestly pretty pathetic, so she earns a 1 out of 5 here. Aino's hydro application is decent, but slow without another Nod-Krai support, so she can only shine in Taser, Quick Bloom, and some vaporized teams solo without help. At C2, her application reliably resets to the Hydra Aura, which is super handy. Paired with another Nod-Krai unit, her Hydra application ramps up, letting her support many more teams. While there is a lot of variability here, her Hydra application will normally be enough and can sometimes exceed what is needed, which I think earns her an above average 3 out of 5. Aino's offensive utility comes from her C1's 80 Elemental Mastery, her C6's reaction damage boost, and her best in slot artifact set, which boosts both. This lets her buff allies with anywhere from 60 Elemental Mastery to 200 Elemental Mastery plus 55% lunar reaction damage, giving her solid versatility. What really sets her apart though is her ability to shorten rotation times, which allows her to rival top tier buffers. If not, she mostly relies on her Hydra application to carry her, which is just above average. average. With all that said, I think it's best to put her offensive utility at a simple 2 out of 5, as it could be incredibly potent, but for most characters, her buff will be hardly impactful. Aino only generates 3 particles per skill cast, which is quite low by today's standards. Plus, she relies heavily on those particles for energy, especially before C4 when her burst cost is higher, so she cannot battery other units effectively. All these aspects net her a 1 out of 5 for battery potential. For defensive utility, she is nothing, 0 out of 5. Aino's flexibility and versatility, though, is okay. At worst, she buffs the main DPS with 60 elemental mastery and applies Hydra sporadically, which is still enough for many teams. At best, she provides 200 elemental mastery, a lunar charge bonus, and consistent Hydra application to guarantee aura uptime. Her strength lies in buffing with elemental mastery and applying Hydro, making her usable in a wide range of teams. The downside, she's purely a support, so while she may be a very versatile character, her lack of flexibility earns her an average 2.5 out of 5. Overall, Aino is pretty good. She is a support unit that is meant to enable future Nod-Krai releases, and she does that job very well. Because of her element application and strong elemental mastery buff, she can also work in many different situations if you ever need a pure Hydro support. This earns her a pretty solid 2.5 out of 5 for overall value. Aino is pretty good as a general free support. While she will not shape the meta, she definitely seems like she will slide right in pretty well, at least until Columbina arrives. But that's all I have to say about Aino. Now tell me your thoughts. What do you think of her? Who do you intend to use her with? Are you excited about our first Hydro Claymore user being added into the game? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. But with that, I will skedaddle. Thank you all so much for watching, and I wish you all good luck on your pulls. Bye bye.